record. Okay. Hi, YouTube. It's been a while, but here we are. And I have with me today, Crypt Rick. There are several reasons why I wanted to interview Rick today. And that's because he has taken the time to go and speak with a veterinarian and ask that vet some questions about dog behavior around cadavers. And also, if we have time, he's mentioned a few times in some of his other videos and interviews that, he could see how David could not be guilty, and then he could see how David could be guilty. So I would like to kind of touch on some of those, on how he both actually, his view on what could lean him one way or the other, because I think that's really important. I think a lot of people feel the same way. They'll hear something or read something in the case, not quite understand it, and they go back and forth. I mean, if you don't know, what are you going to think? It's like, hey, so I get that. So welcome, Rick. And why don't you let everybody know how you went about this, what made you call the vet, and we'll take it from there.
As you said, I've been reading, everybody told me at the beginning of this that I should read all the documents myself and don't listen to any one person or a group of people. Read it all yourself and go. And I did. I took that upon myself. I didn't realize how much there was to read. There's a lot of information to go through. Yeah. So I did everything. I read the scripts, I've read the journals, I've read all of the other police reports, looked at all the many photos, and then because I guess it's because I'm an animal lover. I don't know. I honed in on the dog, and I also, probably because a lot of people are blaming this dog for everything, basically. And a lot of what they're saying happened to the bodies and happened to the crime scene was because of the dog. So I thought, it's logic, right? Like, let's go talk to a vet. I want to talk to a vet who knows about animals. And I do know a vet in my area that I'm friends with. And I thought he would be the perfect guy to ask. And he's been a vet now for almost 60 years. He's an older gentleman, worked as a farm. He started off as a vet for farms and taking care of like farm animals, like horses and whatnot. And then now he's been practicing for years, taking care of cats and dogs and all that kind of stuff. So I went in and spoke to him, and I set up the meeting, which was kind of funny story in its own, because I didn't want to tell him too much about the case, because I just wanted the aspect of what a dog the size of Paleo could do. So I didn't want to show him crime scene photos. I didn't want to throw a big stack of papers down and stuff like that. I wasn't looking at that aspect of the case. I just wanted to hone in on what a dog can do and what he thinks. And let me just reference by saying that this is only his opinion. I'm just telling you guys what he told me. So take it for what it's worth. I mean, I'm listening to an expert that knows animals and what they can do. So I it gives me a bit of weight to me anyways. He definitely knows a lot more about a dog than I do and what they can do. So I went in and I set up a meeting with him, and I just told him I gave him a little bit about the case. Like there was body parts missing, and I explained which body parts, like the heads were eaten. There was an arm missing. There was 3 hands missing, all of that kind of stuff. And that's where we kind of set the interview. That's where I kind of took the interview off at, was basically, I just told him the very detail, like what was wrong with the bodies, and kind of like what was going on around the immediate crime scene with the dog food, and that there was dry dog food there. I said there was a full bag of dry dog food, and there was a half-eaten bag of dry dog food. But there was no signs of scratching, or the dog was trying to tear at it or tear it over. So that's kind of where my interview with him started. And that's where it started.
Well, I'm really glad you did that, because as far as I know, no one in our group has actually taken that step yet. I know when I interviewed the coroner, or a medical examiner, I'm sorry, they're different. A medical examiner is actually a doctor. But when I was talking to them, he was making the comment and showed a photo of what a dog could do and had done to a particular body. And However, what I noticed in the photograph he showed me is the skull was completely intact. Yeah, other bones were missing, but that skull was completely intact. So that, and that was my comment, and he didn't quite like that. And all I was doing was saying, but the head's still there.
Right. Right.
And so what did this particular vet tell you about your questions, or how did he answer your questions?
Well, yeah, I kind of got them. You gotta be a little patient because I got them written on my phone here. I'm not as good as you taking notes yet, but I'm getting there. But yeah, I've listened to this interview, and it was only about a 20-minute interview because he was nice enough. He didn't charge me for the interview or anything like that. He just made, he said, make an appointment and then come on in. We'll have a coffee and you can ask me what you want. So I started, as I said, when I was just answering it a minute ago, I started off to start like asking him questions because I wanted to ask him about the dog food. That's the part that I've always wondered about. I'm like, there's a full bag of dog food there, and there's a half bag of dog food. And I also asked him about the water because there was, from what I can tell, and I could be wrong, I didn't see a water dish anywhere for the dog. So I said to the vet, he basically had 2 toilets that we know of that had water in them, from what I can tell. And if I'm ever wrong, correct me, Catherine, by all means.
No, there was upstairs, not the downstairs. However,
Right.
from what I remember reading in the police reports, the downstairs toilet was closed. The lid
Right,
was closed,
right.
upstairs was open. So you
Right.
really only had access to one.
To one bowl, right? And I remember saying that to the vet. I was like, he only had basically access to a very limited amount of water, and unless a dog can flush the toilet, I mean, they blamed him for everything else, so maybe he can do that too.
Right.
But like, yeah. So I said, like, he only had that limited amount of water, from what we can tell. He only had like basically a toilet bowl full of water, and then I was asking about the dry food, and at first, like, I thought I kind of caught him in a moment because I said, "Is that weird that a dog would start eating like eating their owner if they have dry dog food?" And that the very first thing he said was, yeah, that's kind of weird. And I was like, so we're getting somewhere. And but then we started talking a little bit more, and I explained to him how there was gunshots to the head. I said there was definitely, like I said, there was lots of gunshots to the head. I said, so there would, and then there would have been a lot of blood and tissue, which I get into with him later on in the interview with them. And then that's when he kind of clicked in, and he was like, wait a minute, like, okay, there's gunshots to the head and there's a lot of blood. And he kind of like said, and it made sense what he said. He's like, you have to, like, I always look at this. I think people, when they look at what the dog did, they try to look at it from a human aspect.
Right.
And if you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
I wouldn't do that. But he's like, what he told me was, you have to look at this as an animal aspect,
Right.
from a dog's aspect.
And it's not good or bad. It's just instinct.
Right. That's what he said. He's like, it's an animal. It's a wild
Right.
animal when you really boil it down. So
Mhm.
he said, you have dry dog food, and he goes, you have tissue. He goes, you have fresh blood, a lot of blood. You got brain matter. You've got, scattered everywhere. They're full of blood. The bodies are full of blood. The dog is naturally going to go to that area. He said, that's like a boot, like that's a banquet, he said. And he was just being very honest. He's like, to a dog, that's like heaven. He's like, it's fresh meat. And he's
Yeah,
like, it
that's what the
sounds
coroner was saying. I mean, the medical
right.
examiner said too. Yep.
Right. And he said and then I said, that kind of does make sense when you start looking at it from the aspect of a dog. And I was like, okay, so you think, because I was like, remember saying to him, I'm like, is that weird that the dog ate that much of their owners? Like, he ate their heads, and he apparently ate their hands. And there was and I've, a lot of people go back and forth, but there was not a lot of blood at the crime scene itself, which I did ask him about further down. That's kind of like what I'm leading up to. But he does believe, if the dog was there, now this is what he said, if the dog was there for the 3 weeks, like they say, he believes the dog could do this damage that I told him about. He said he thinks the dog could do it if the dog was there 3 weeks. Now, if the dog was there less than 3 weeks, it's not so sure, because it depends. He has to have, you have to have the right amount of time to do this. He didn't do it all in like one day, but he said over the course of 3 weeks, a dog could definitely do this amount of damage, he thinks. And I said, well, what about the water? And he said a dog could definitely live on that much water for those 3 weeks, because you have to remember that if he's eating on these bodies, there's a lot of water in the flesh itself, in the blood and stuff like that. So he said it would be enough, he thinks, for the dog to survive and do that damage.
And see this, I would have loved to ask him this question, because this is something I've often wondered about, because blood actually dehydrates you.
Right.
And human blood is different from animal blood. So it would be more of a dehydration factor. So how would that have affected the dog's health? Did he say that at all?
No, he didn't actually, but I am going to write that down and I will ask him, because he said I could always come back to him if I have any more questions or people have questions. He's more than willing to answer them. So I will write that down right now.
Because when I was talking to the medical examiner, I didn't even think about that, because I was just so new to the case. And basically all I wanted to talk to the medical examiner about was the autopsy reports, because, the garbage that we put up with,
Right.
oh, you don't know what it's saying. Okay, medical terminology is a finger's a finger, a head's a head. You can't switch the stuff up. And
Exactly.
so I really wish that I had known more about the case when I did talk to the ME. But one thing and another thing, I would like, if he's willing to answer this question, because I don't think this is possible. Is it, to me, and you may be covering this here in a second, but it's the specifics, just the hands, just the face, nothing else. To me, I've never seen a dog pick that. Will they go for where the blood is? Yeah, across the board, everyone has said yes, that's without question. Yes. But then the other thing is the large portions of skull that are found. It's not just shards, it's large chunks. And that is not something a dog, when you're taking anatomy and physiology and you're messing with cadavers like we had to when I was taking the class, I don't think people understand how strong the skull is. And a dog, I can't see how the dog could pull off major chunks of skull. That to me really is more consistent with the multiple blunt force trauma that you see upon the skull pieces. So if he could address the size of skull pieces that should be found, if any are left, that would be a good thing too.
Definitely. I could definitely ask him. And I did kind of ask him, I did ask him half of that question. I did ask him about why the areas that the dog did attack, like I wouldn't say attack, but the dog did feed on. It sounds so gruesome when you talk about it, but it's the truth, but where the dog fed on. And he thinks immediately he said, yes, definitely the head. What he thinks is that probably because of the gunshot wounds, the dog may have started licking at the blood, because he said the scent of that blood in that house would be so strong that it would just, his animal instincts would kick in, his dog instincts would kick in, and he would start licking at the blood. So he thinks he could have probably started licking at the head and then just kept licking like dogs do. And I've had dogs where if they start licking at something, they'll just keep going and going.
Yep.
So he probably started doing that and then just started feeding on the head, kind of because that's where the blood was concentrated on. And I asked him also about the hands. And I said, is that weird that he would eat the hands? And he said, what he said was, and I'm going to go by what he said, is that the dog was, there could have been blood on the hands, which would attract the dog to the hands, and that they're easy accessible. From what, and remember, he didn't see any of the crime scene photos. I was just told him the parts that got eaten. I didn't tell him that there was hands that were kind of under bodies in that, but he was saying the dog would go to areas that were exposed and would have blood on them. So that's the answer that he gave. But I didn't ask him about the size of like bone chunks and stuff, but I will ask him that for sure.
Okay. Yeah. And and if you're looking at that, like he said, yeah, that would make sense if there is blood on a hand. However, the feet are completely, exposed, not touched. The one hand, his left hand, is completely exposed and not touched. So yeah.
Those are good points. I know. Yeah. I never asked him that.
But he doesn't know, he's answering honestly and for what's exposed. And like you said, when Kamel's left hand is completely under her body and she's face down on the floor, so how does he get to this part of her face if it's on the floor? Right. And so that's kind of always been my question. And that's what I was asking the ME as well. I'm like, oh, but she's face down. And, there's no evidence of the dog going, because he would have to dig his muzzle into there to get up. Right. And again, I know this is gross, but I'm tired of the naysayers on this. You're face down, you're like this, and this dog's got to get in and eat up all of this portion that's on a floor, but yet leave all of this alone. So again, we're going back to what's accessible, what's easily accessible. Is the dog going to go for, there's, and from what I can tell on the writings and how they described finding the bodies, it did not seem like her head was contorted, or where it would look like a dog had to go in and dig and kind of pull at. That didn't seem to be the case, because her head is covered. It's covered with a blanket. So we've got her face missing while it's covered with a blanket. But see, he doesn't know that. And then with that left one arm up underneath her body, that's not accessible. Her right hand absolutely is accessible. So yeah, what he said would make sense. Did you ask about like the abdominal cavities? Would a dog go for that area?
Well, that's what I did ask him. And I kind of like touched on that. I was like, and he thinks it's because the body's like, it wasn't accessible. Like that's what he kept going back to when I asked him. And I'm now that you're bringing up points like you are, I'm going to go back to him with this. And I know I'm really going to get him thinking now, because it's not as easy explained once you start telling them that there's parts that are not easy accessible. There's a hand that's still there that the dog never did touch. So, but yeah, like I told him, I said, from what I could tell of the clothes photo, that it did look like the dog was scratching. Like to me, there's some rips in David's shirt, and it does look like the dog was kind of scratching at it to me.
On the back side of his shirt, though, and he's laying on his back.
I know. Well,
but that makes sense what you're saying though about little Rania's shirt, though.
Right.
Yes, that makes lots of sense. And in Kamel's pant leg.
Right. Yeah, that's what I told him. I said it looked like the dog was pawing at it, whether or not trying to wake them up, or he thinks that he was probably pawing at the blood. Like I said, do you think he was trying to wake them up, like because they weren't moving and stuff? And he said, no, I think he was probably pawing at the blood and trying to get at what was causing the blood or whatever. So that's what he gave me on that. But I definitely gonna have to ask him those questions that you were just mentioning, because those are good questions, and it kind of changes the whole dynamic of that answer when you start saying that there's not all easy accessible.
But this is good, though. I really think that this is a good base and a good foundation, because from here we're going to build on from the basics of, is this normal animal behavior? Right. Well, now we all know, because I've heard it from several others too. Yes, this is normal animal behavior, because like you were saying at the beginning, so many people tend to think that their animals, oh, my animal would never. But yeah, they do. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad animal. It's just what they do.
Right. And I said that to him too. I said, so you're telling me that if I die, my cats will eat me if they have no food? And he was like, oh yeah, they'll eat you. No problem.
And cats are worse than dogs.
Yep. That's what he said. He goes, that's just what they do. He said, it's not a personal thing. You're dealing with an animal with instincts. And the smell of blood is so strong to a dog, and I would imagine a cat as well, that it's to them, he said it bluntly. He's like, to them, you're just a big piece of meat. You're like a big steak. And I was like, it makes sense. It really does.
Yeah, because the moment that you start to decay, your body now sends off a different scent. And it's going to trigger that wild aspect of who they are in their brain. And you can't hate them for it. You can't call them horrible names for it. That's like telling somebody who, but and yet it's so funny, because yet how many people will sit there and eat a really raw steak and think it's the best thing they had, and and then condemn a dog because it's going to eat a human body, when that's pretty much the same thing. It's human tartare, but don't people eat steak tartare?
Yep. And that's what he said. Yeah, and that's what he was saying. If your animal is hungry enough, you are just a food source. And then he also gave the example. He said, don't forget that humans are no different than a dog when they're starving. He's like, remember people that have got into plane crashes and stuff like that. You hear about cases where they've had to feed on human bodies to survive. If you're hungry enough, you're going to eat. If there's a meat source there, you're going to eat it. And whether it's a dog, a cat, a human, it's meat. That's what he said. It's meat.
That's true. I am a vegetarian now, vegetarian, vegan, depending on my day or my mood in that particular week. But I do not eat. I cannot bring myself to eat meat anymore. Part of that reason here is, though, because when we were younger, we lived on the Crow Indian Reservation for a few years. My mother happened to have married the drummer of the tribe. And there were so many times in the places that we were living, it was condemned housing where half the time we didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity. And even in the winter, we didn't have a refrigerator. But thank goodness in Montana, you could put your meat out and your food outside on your porch because it kept it cold. It was all snow and cold all winter long. But I particularly remember so many times we would be so hungry. And I would tell my mom, you know, she'd be in the room sleeping, right? I'd be like, Mom, I'm so hungry. I'm hungry. Can you go make us something? And she'd be like, well, there's kidney and heart in the refrigerator. Go get it. And I'm like, but we can't turn on, you won't let me turn on the stove. She's like, just go cut a piece off and eat it. I was so hungry. That's what I did. I ate the raw cow heart and I ate the raw cow kidney. But as a 12-year-old kid, when you're starving and you haven't been eating for days, you will. I don't care what anybody says, you will eat whatever the hell you find. Right. And so to this day, though, I cannot, I don't begrudge anybody else who eats meat. You know, like I go out with my friends, and my one particular friend, she's a huge carnivore. And so I'm like, eat whatever you want, don't care, but don't think I'm not gonna touch it. So
I'm not joining you. I don't blame you. Yeah. So yeah, that, and it made sense when he said that. Like it really did. Like when you start looking at a lot of this case from the aspect of a wild, like of a dog, it makes sense. Like, but then as you brought up, if there's parts of the dog can't get to, and when I bring that up to him, I'm really curious to what he's gonna say to that. Like how do you explain that? You can explain the head, you can explain a lot of the stuff, but why did he not eat certain parts that were exposed? Like there was another hand exposed, he didn't touch that. So, and I didn't want to, like, I really just didn't want to hit him with like, hit him with everything at once, you know, like,
well, because
I just want to kind of warm him up.
Yeah. And that was the thing why a lot of the stuff I did, you know, I didn't know some of, well, actually the majority of these things, but B, other things I had kept from the medical examiner, because the amount of information is so intense. But because other people then went and contacted this ME and lied to him and told him that I was calling them a murderer online. I never called any of them a murderer, especially this particular person who has nothing to do with the freaking case, but then tells this and sends this big sob story. And then the ME buys it hook, line, and sinker and is saying, oh yeah, well, she's seen this. And I'm like, what the hell? You know, because I felt the interview went really well. He was very honest. And I stated what he said. From what he read in the reports, he stated he felt that David had done it. And so I, you know, but I did ask him, if I present with you information that shows he's innocent, would you change your mind? And he said, absolutely. But at that point on that day, that's where he stood. And I'm like, cool. So I was going to come back for a second interview and then bring up this other information, especially when I found out that her head was covered with a blanket, her left hand was under her body. And then, like you just said, David's left hand is exposed. That is not touched, but parts that are covered are gone. How is that possible? And I mean, without, so that to me says staging of a crime scene again, and then blaming this poor dog. Is there anything else that you guys covered?
Oh, I covered. Yeah. I asked him also about, because Greg was asking me to ask him, like Greg said, can you ask the vet what if a dog could eat that much bone, and would it hurt the dog's insides and is you know, and all of that. And I was like, I'll ask him. So I did. And he said, I said, like, can a dog eat that much bone in that amount of 3 weeks? And would it hurt the dog? And he said, absolutely not. He said, dogs, that they can chew that much bone, they'll break it up over time. And he said, it won't hurt the insides. And I said, really? I kind of thought it would, but when you think about it, they do. Dogs eat bone, they chew it right down, and they swallow pieces of bone in that. Now, he did say that there would be bone in the feces if they would have tested. He said you would have definitely found bone in it, and they could have tested for DNA too. He said they have been able to do that for a while now. And I didn't ask him about that. He brought that up on his own.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. See, that tells me a lot right there.
Right.
So, my brain, and that's good to know that their intestines can digest it to a point. And that makes sense, because when, as you're saying that, I'm like thinking about when, I was younger and we had dogs, and when I have friends who have dogs, what do? You go to the butcher and get the bones, right?
That's what he said.
Bones. And yeah, they eat those suckers. So
That's
yeah.
what he said. He goes, because he has a dog, because it's a vet. He has his dog there all the time. He said, I go to the butcher all the time. They got boxes of bones, different size bones that you can pick for your dog. And he said, I get the big bones. And he goes, my dog will chew it right down. Like, you'll give it a big bone, he said. And within like a week, it's nothing left. He just eats the whole bone. And I was surprised that a dog wouldn't get any damage from that. And he said, no,
Yeah.
they're designed to do that. He said that's not going to hurt the dog at all. So I did ask that question for Greg.
Okay, good. And then now that hopefully will be settled and put to rest. But it is interesting because what he said goes along, because when you were telling me that you had done this interview, I went and I did some more research and reading, and there was a site that I came across, and they stated the same thing that this vet said, is that you will find visible pieces of bone within the feces. Now, they might not be big, huge chunks, but you will see visible proof of bones within that feces. And then if you test it, you will find the DNA of,
right.
And so that to me is, then I'm like questioning really big time, because we see the feces, we see those photos, and I'm sorry, I don't see bone fragments in that dog feces.
Right.
So now I'm like,
it makes you wonder, right?
Right.
And I did also ask him, because a lot of people were saying that if he was eating off the bodies, that the dog would have like the runs, like diarrhea or whatever. Like, and I said to him, I said, is that, like I said, from the pictures I saw, it looks pretty much firm. I mean, it's not, definitely not the runs or explosive diarrhea everywhere. Right. And he said he kind of did the scale thing with his hands like this. He's like, that's up 50-50. He goes, some animals, if they would infect their feces at all, and he said some animals it would. And he said there's no right or wrong answer to that. He just kind of did the scale thing. And
okay.
I was like, okay. So, and he said, especially if the owners were ever feeding the dog meat, like scraps of meat or whatever, or he was getting meat from his dog food, like if they were giving him wet dog food, or he said if the dog was eating meat of some sort, he wouldn't have a big reaction if he started eating the meat off the owners.
Okay, so see, that makes sense.
Right. I thought he was going to say that it should be all running everywhere. That's where my brain went, because I've had animals where if you change their diet too quick, bad things happen. Like it does havoc on their insides. But he said with a dog, it's totally different than a cat, because I was going by cat aspect. And he said with a dog, it's kind of different. And if the dog's already been introduced to meat in his diet over the years, he's, like I said, he went 50-50. He's like, there's no right or wrong to that. It could be, could not be.
Oh, okay. Well, oh man, see, this is really helpful.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I thought I kind of would have got him with the runny poop. I was like, I got him on this one. And then he did the 50-50, and I was like, he got me again. So I'm trying.
No, it's like, I think it's really helpful. And, how I'm viewing this is like, it's really now with everybody we have been talking to, for some reason, even myself and most people in the group, we kind of have all speculated as to what we think should or should not have happened with this dog. But now we have, like you said, it's a professional. He's been doing this how many years?
Oh, he's like 60 years or something like that. He's an older. He's almost retired.
Okay.
So he's been at it, and he said he's been a vet his whole life. So
he obviously knows what he's talking about.
Right.
And now with what he's telling us, now we can put together, what Paleo could have done. And, that just falls within the realm of being a dog. And what we know he could not have done, like the covered heads. How is he going to get to the head if it's covered with a blanket? Right. No evidence of him being able to get to it. How did he get to the arm? We know he didn't do the Kamel's head and Kamel's left hand, but he very easily could have done the other hands. I still, did you ask him if that dog could pull an arm from a socket? I don't think so.
I didn't ask him that either. I should have. I thought of that when I was leaving. I was like, I forgot, but I will ask him. I'll set up another interview, and I will.
Yeah, because that takes a lot of force I'm telling you, a lot in just the damage that was done to, her upper pec area, and then a fractured rib underneath that. I just don't think that dog could do that. Right. But yet we do know, though, he could have then, if if that arm was taken off by a human, that then the dog could have at that point consumed the arm and only left evidence within his feces
Right.
that they never tested, which is good to know.
It's good to know. That's what I thought. It doesn't matter what, like, at least we're getting answers, and we're getting it from a professional, which I think has a lot of weight to it. We're not speculating, and he's giving us his opinion and like what he knows as a vet. And I thought that's really cool. I was really happy that he even talked to me, because I kind of just went at him. He had no, like, I was trying to explain to him. I kind of said the dog was beside, because you can't really tell the size of the dog. I said it's kind of like the size of a cocker spaniel, maybe, to a black lab. I said, so somewhere I wanted to give it quite a bit of leeway for the size of the dog, just because, I figured I got
Well,
to be
I
fair. I don't want to say it's a small, tiny dog, and I don't want to say it's a huge dog. So I was like, kind of like lab, cocker spaniel, somewhere
Well,
in that.
and to help you ask him the next time, I read somewhere, and I will see if I can find that information again, that Paleo, when he was found at the time and taken to the kennel, he weighed like 14 or 15 pounds.
Wow.
So, but that was not his normal weight. He'd actually lost weight.
Right.
So
Right.
at the time that he was found, he was 15 pounds. So I would say 15 to 20 pounds maybe is what the dog normally weighs, which would be good. How much can a dog that size consume? And yeah,
What should its average weight be, right? If it was eating, like, you think it wouldn't have lost too much weight eating if he ate everything they say that he did, that's a pretty,
there you
that's a
go.
lot
Ask
of, that's
that
a lot.
question.
Yeah, that's a lot of calories if you're eating all of that. Like,
Yeah,
so I
because
wonder, that's a light weight for a dog that size, I would think.
yes, the dog had actually lost weight. It was described as thin. The dog
Okay.
was thin, and we can see by photos that David had in his journal, Paleo was not a thin dog. He was actually quite a little chunk-a-monk,
Right.
like a
Right.
very healthy dog. And then to have him when he was found called thin. And then we do have a photo and see a photo of Paleo sitting in there with Dan Jr. and Dan's on the
Right.
outside of Paleo's inside. And he does look very thin compared to the photos from David's journal. So he had lost a lot of weight. So yeah, that would be a great question, asking the vet, would the dog then lose 5+ pounds consuming human flesh, which
Right.
could be possible because, like I said, human blood, which is different from cow's blood and pig's blood, animal blood, it does dehydrate. So which could have then made the dog, even though he could have been eating, he's now still going to become dehydrated. So
Right.
that'd be a great question.
That is a great question too. And then I also, what I was asking him too, because I tried to get him on another aha moment. I was trying to throw little stumps at him, like trying to, like, little roadblocks, and he answered them perfect. He just had no problem with them. And I was asking him, I said, like, from what I can tell of the crime scene photos, there's no bloody dog footprints anywhere. I said, if the dog's walking around and he's eating, I'll go with you on the journey that he's eating on these bodies and he's clawing at them, but he's going to get blood on his paws or around his lips, like in the fur of his mouth and stuff like that. And I said, like, you don't see any bloody paw prints anywhere. I said, like, at least I don't, and I don't see any on
No,
the couch. I don't see.
there's
And
none.
he said that that's probably from the dog. He said, you got to remember 3 weeks that dogs lick a lot. And if he's going around, he's going to be licking at that blood. So he's going to be licking the blood. And I said, and that's why when I was leading up to, and I said earlier that I was telling him about there's not a ton of blood at the crime scene. And he did say that that's probably because for 3 weeks that dog was going around licking everything. And he'd be licking at if there's stuff on the ground, like brain matter or anything like that, the dog would naturally go to that. And I said, so you think if there was bloody paw prints on the couch, he could lick the couch enough to get rid of those prints, like clean the couch. And he thought the dog could do that with that amount of time. He thought that the dog could clean its paws. And I'm just going, people, by what he told me, that the dog could clean his paws enough that there wouldn't be any blood if there was blood on his paws, and the same around his mouth. That it's possible that the dog could have been kind of like cleaning up all the blood around the crime scene. And if there was any like paw prints on the furniture, he might have licked that. But then now I have a question for him that I'm thinking about as I'm talking right now. If that's the case, and he was licking the paw prints up, why didn't he lick the blood up on the chair? That big pool of blood on the
And
bottom.
and the blood, that the spatter that is on the floor. Now,
Right.
here's the thing. And again,
Right.
and this is why I say, and I honestly believe he's going to change that opinion in this case because he doesn't know everything. He just is going
Right.
by generalizations. And generally, yes, that is true. A dog will go and look it up. However, when they sprayed the areas with the amino black, which is
Right.
a luminol type product, you don't see cleanup. And now it
That's
would still
true.
be picking up the tongue swipes on the floor of the cleaned up blood. You see none of that anywhere. There's there's
That is
there's no
true.
there's no evidence of a dog licking up blood. But yet we see on the footprints where blood had been swiped underneath, that had been cleaned up. You don't see it to the naked eye, but when they spray it, it's picked up. That's the hemoglobin is still picked up. But and then so you see where a swipe pattern there.
Right.
So which is not the dog licking. It was cleaned up, new things put on top. I mean, it's layered, so you clearly see that. But again, if he were to see those crime scene photos or even get more of that puzzle, then I really honestly believe he'll be like, oh, wait a second, because there's that one section where, and I could be wrong because to me it looks like a bloody handprint on the floor because there's quite a bit of blood in one spot, but then some spatter. That dog would have gone around licking all of that up while it was fresh.
Right. But that's
I
what I
mean,
mean. You can't like we can't have it both ways. It's
right,
like I mean, it's very if you're gonna say the dog was licking up all the blood around and cleaning up the crime scene, well, he's very selective, is what I'm
right.
saying. Like he cleaned his paws, he cleaned his face, he cleaned up a lot of blood on the couch where he maybe or wherever he was sleeping and there was blood everywhere, like if his paws were
Mhm.
tracking blood, but why not clean up what you were just talking about? Why not clean up the blood, the circle of blood on the lazy boy chair at the bottom of that? That's a big stain.
Yeah, well, he would have been chewing at that chair.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
why so selective?
Mhm.
That's a good point. And I'm gonna have to give him the photos, I guess, because I think that's gonna make it a lot more clear for him
Yeah.
when he starts seeing a bit more of the evidence.
Yeah. And too, with those prints when they were put down on that floor, regardless, we're not going with how they got there. However, those prints got on the floor, some believe they're actually foot. I did the comparison. I'm working on that video. It doesn't match up. And or did somebody put them there? Doesn't matter. It was still fresh blood at that time.
Mhm.
And yeah, the dog should have gone straight to those larger areas. And so therefore those wouldn't even have been there
Right.
anymore. They would have been like swiped and smudged and everything all over. So yeah.
That'll be a good thing to ask him. Yeah, I'm gonna definitely give him the crime scene photos. I'm gonna have to well, I'll ask him. I shouldn't say I'm gonna give
Yes.
them to him. I'll ask him if he'll look at them when he has a moment because I do think that I'm very curious how he's gonna explain that away that like I mean, why would he be so selective and why leave the hand behind? Why yeah, so those are good questions and I'm hoping he will answer them. I'm hoping he will.
Yeah. And I think he will. I mean, but like you said, he's very knowledgeable and brought up some really good points. Was there anything else you guys talked about?
I asked him because I had heard in another interview that people were saying that the bodies should have, and I'm not sure where I heard this, but I do remember people talking about it that the bodies didn't have like maggots on it. There was no
Right.
like flies around it and stuff like that. So I did let him know that this was winter in Minnesota. And that didn't shock him at all. Like he's like, there wouldn't be any flies, there wouldn't be any maggots. He said they just don't appear. They have maggots are coming from the laying of
The
eggs.
flies. Mhm.
Right. And he said, so that doesn't surprise me at all. He did say like there would like what you guys have covered before, there would be bloating, there would be like all the things you described with a deep decomposing body. He said that's what you would see, but there would I'm just saying I wanted to answer that question because I know a few people were asking it of like they've said, well, they couldn't have been there 3 weeks because there was no maggots, there was no flies. That time of year, he said there wouldn't be any.
No, and even if there was a warm day or two, I'm from Minnesota,
Right.
so I was born and lived a good portion of my life in Minneapolis. So I know Minnesota weather and I know Minnesota winters. But if there's a warm spot, could a fly then kind of patch somewhere? Sure. But this is in the middle of a cold spell in winter, snow on the ground, and life flies, what, they only live maybe 24 hours. It's
Right,
not, they
right.
don't live very long. So you would not expect to see any maggots or fly activity in that house at
Right.
all.
And that's why I addressed it though with them because
Yeah.
I know like I said to him, I said, I'm not even sure if you're gonna know this. I just kind of threw it out at him because I do remember hearing people in the video kind of debating that and saying like, why is there no flies? Why is there no maggots? That shows that the bodies weren't there or they were moved, blah, blah, blah. You know the story. So I was
Mhm.
like, I'm just going to ask him. And then he jumped right on it. He's like, at that time of year, you're not going to have that type of stuff. He's like, there's no flies. You know, it was normal to him.
Yeah,
But it didn't.
if it had been summertime and the body had
Right.
been there a week, oh yeah, you would definitely find. If you didn't find any maggots, you would go, oh, okay, something's up here. But
Right.
wintertime, yeah. So I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I just get so tired of repeating the same thing over and over. It's like, well, okay, I've said it once, either you listen or you won't, and we're gonna let it
Right.
go. Time to move
Yeah.
on.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I mean, I'm only, and that's why I was saying at the beginning, I can only go by what he's telling me.
Right.
And he definitely knows a lot more than I do about the character of an animal and what they can do to, like, I was shocked. When I first started looking into this case, I didn't even think it was possible that a dog would eat their owner. Like, that's how naive I was.
Oh,
I
okay.
was like, a dog wouldn't, your dog, my cat wouldn't eat me if I was dead and they were hungry. It's kind of shocking when you find out that, yeah, you're just a food source, if you want
Uh-huh.
to break it down, to be honest. And I was kind of shocked about that.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that stuff before, and
Right. I never did. So I think people
so,
think that their animals love them and, they
yeah.
do. But I mean, when they're hungry, you're just a big steak. So I was like,
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like you stated at the very beginning, I think you said that's what the vet was saying.
right.
People tend to forget that once that blood gets in them and it triggers that
Right.
portion of their brain, they're no longer that pet. They are now back to their wild instincts.
Exactly. That's what he
And
said.
they can't stop it. It's just what happens.
Yep.
And but again, does it mean that they're bad animals and should they be, euthanized? No, if they can find a loving home, they can go back to, eating their dog food and not
Yeah.
going around trying to attack and kill you in your sleep, unless it's a
Right.
crazy
Yeah.
dog.
Well,
That's
exactly.
outrageous.
But yeah, so yeah, it was really cool. I learned a lot from this interview with him. I really did, and it was interesting. And even though I tried to kind of throw a little stump, like I thought I'd get him on the bloody dog footprints for sure. I was like, well, there's no dog footprints. And then he jumped right on it. He was like, well, the dog's probably cleaning them up and cleaning his paws and washing his face. And I thought, well, it makes sense. But now that you bring up that there's other areas of the crime scene where there is blood and the dog didn't clean it up. He's getting selective.
Mhm.
So it's good. It's a good thing to ask him. I'm going to be excited to set up another interview with him.
Yeah, and again, though, this is really excellent base information, and you have to get that base information
Right.
first before you can start building on that. And then, okay, I mean, because as any learning, you're going to learn the very basics of anything first before you start to switch up the scenarios. So yeah, it would be really great because I have yet to see a dog be selective and pick and choose and then can eat something under a body and then put a blanket over it. Let me eat your face and then, let me put a blanket over your head.
Right.
That just doesn't
And same with
happen.
David's hand. Why? Yeah. Like, why not eat the other hand of David? And I didn't even think of that when I was talking to him. And I'm sure you've had this when you interview people too. You always remember questions when you're done the interview. Then
Yeah.
you're like, I didn't ask this. I didn't ask this. Why
Mhm.
didn't I ask this? And it's just so frustrating. And I'm learning that the hard way. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking that when I left the interview with him, I'm like, why didn't I ask him about parts that were exposed that the dog didn't eat? So I'm glad that he said I could come back to him with some more questions and he would take the time to answer me. I'm just hoping that he'll look at some of the photos and stuff like that, kind of give him a better idea of what we're dealing with and what's around the crime scene and stuff like that. I'd be really curious to see what he thinks.
Yeah, because I'm telling you that crime scene tells a story,
It
and
does.
and it is showing a lot of violence and a lot of rage. It is an extremely violent crime scene.
Mhm.
It wasn't a simple coming in and gunshots and it's over. No, there's violence throughout that house. And things may not be moved, but there's absolute evidence of violence. So yeah, it's and again, so it's like I do know that dogs will clean up, and what he said, that is true, but they're not going to be selective. And let me clean up my paws while I ate here at their face. Now let me clean everything up and then leave everything else over here.
Right.
It just,
Right. And yeah, I know, yeah, when you think about it like that, it's true. Like, why would, and maybe and I'm not saying the dog wasn't selective, maybe he was, but to me, it's kind of weird that he
yeah, when you
wouldn't have
start
cleaned
putting
up.
everything together,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Like,
up.
I mean, and then I'm sure the vet might say that the reason that he didn't attack one of like didn't eat David's other hand, maybe it didn't have blood on it or something. I mean, I'm guessing that's what he's going to say because he was really big on that the parts that got eaten were covered with blood. That's kind of where he was going with. He's like, it was that because I asked him about the hand. I said, there's hands missing. Why would he go for that? Because I always thought that animals would go, and maybe you know this better. I didn't even ask him this, but wouldn't animals go for the soft tissue more like the stomach and the abdomen? And I'm just thinking like when you die out in nature, the first thing that birds go for is your eyes and like soft areas. So why is it as simple as they were wearing clothes and that's why the dog didn't go to those soft areas? Or
Well,
I don't know.
the ones that I've seen before, and this could be a breed behavior as well. I've seen some situations where it didn't matter if they had clothes or not. They still went for the abdomen and got it. But
Okay.
yet what he said makes sense. If there's actually active bleeding and active tissue, they're going to go to that area first. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. Okay. I just yeah,
But
like it's a good
here's the
question.
thing. As soon as he said, when you were telling me that he said that, there on the video, on one of the pictures, you see where I think, to me, it looks like on David's left leg toward the upper part of the thigh and the hip area, where you see it looked like the dog was scratching at his
Right.
pants, ripped a hole, and there is visible skin where it looked like he clawed at that skin, and now you see muscle underneath or skin underneath, but yet he didn't eat that.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah, because I did
again,
mention that the dog was pawing at him. At least that what it looks like to me. But
mhm.
that's true. Why wouldn't he? If he did make all the effort to go through and paw at him like he did, why wouldn't he start eating that area?
Yeah,
That's
if he's going to choose a hand that doesn't have blood on it and then totally bypass active raw flesh,
mhm.
see again, this is where things start to just not make sense when you look at the entire picture. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that what one of the things he said makes absolute sense for one part of the scenario, but does not fit the whole scene. So when you
Right.
start pulling all these things together and getting all these aspects, and you have to look at it as a whole, it's an entire puzzle.
Right.
And so that's when you have to start to question, go, okay, we don't see bone fragments in the feces. Not all of the blood is licked up. There's no evidence of licked up blood on the floor when they sprayed the amino black. There's, choosing pieces of body to eat, large portions of skull that doesn't happen when a dog is gnawing away at a bone,
Mhm.
which is more indicative of blunt force trauma where you're breaking off large sections of skull. So yeah,
It's
just
interesting. It really was. I really enjoyed talking to him. And it's always like that when you do an interview. I wish I could have talked to him more, but you could hear like people coming in and stuff. So, but I will definitely set up another interview. I'm going to jot down all the questions that we were talking about tonight, and just to get his. I really do want to hear what he says. I think it'd be really interesting.
oh yeah, I mean, and yeah, I'm so grateful you did. I love to learn new things, especially from
Me too.
a
Me too.
perspective of someone who knows what they're talking about.
Well,
Because
yeah.
I don't,
I
yes, I can speculate. My brain can run off into some wild fantasies, but at the same time, I don't want to just, it's okay to talk about that and do some brainstorming. But when it's coming down to, okay, let's settle in with what we think really happened, I don't want to mess with that because it's here, it's a fantasy, I guess. But now
right.
we have some good solid bases to take off from and start building the picture to the scenario. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, if I can jump subjects here for just a
Sure, you can
second,
go anywhere you want.
I would really like to touch on especially your views, your particular views, like
Okay.
what leans you toward, you know, I've heard you talk about why you think David could not have done this. Now, what has led you to where you could think, well, maybe he did? So if you could.
Yeah, well, I'm being very honest when I tell people I'm bouncing back and forth. It's the truth.
Mhm.
And I find that it's almost daily as I'm going through the evidence. Like one minute I'm like he did it, and then another minute I'm like he couldn't have done it. And then you'll read some more evidence, and then you're like, no, I think he did it. And then you're going back to no, he didn't do it. And what I've told everybody what I think, why I think he did, like why I think he let me try to word this right. like I have my reasons why I think that he did not do this, because a lot of the evidence to me from what I've read in the reports and I've looked at all the photos, I just can't see him doing this. And it's just because of a lot of the questions, like the bullet in the ceiling, the bullet in the floor, stuff like that. And when you start adding it up, it just leans me to the he couldn't have done this. It just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't add up when you start looking at it.
Well, it's physically impossible. Yeah.
Right, right. And then and I will tell you why I think he could have done it. I mean, I will
Okay.
get there. But and then as I was telling other people, I spoke to a gunsmith who that's what they do for a living. They work with firearms and they know bullets. They know what bullets can do. They know uh what guns can do. Like they just know. And I remember when I was telling him about the bullet in the ceiling, and the first thing he said, he was like, "Well, there must have been tons of blood on the ceiling." And I said, "No, there wasn't any blood on the ceiling." And he's like, "That doesn't make like the first thing he did was like that doesn't make any sense." He's like, what he told me, if those gunshots went to the areas of the body that they said in the head and all that, he said that place should be covered, like painted with blood. He's like, you don't not realize the damage that hollow point bullets do
Yep.
when they're exiting the body. He's like, yes, they make a small little hole when they're going in, but he said the damage is where when that's coming out. And he showed me pictures of bullets of a hollow point, what they look like when they hit hard objects.
Mhm.
And he said, so there did they find any blood on the tissue on in the ceiling, like when they found it in the attic? And I said, no, they had nothing. They had DNA on it. I said, but there was no blood, there was no tissue embedded in the lead, there was no hair. And he's like, that's almost impossible, he said, for that to happen with that type of bullet. And so that's another reason that makes me think that there's something weird going on, not to mention the fact that they found it a month later. And I know a lot of people kind of shrug that off, but to me, that's a huge deal
Yes.
that they find it a month later. And then they found the one that rolled out of the carpet before that. Right. And I'm like, okay, I
Uh,
can understand you missing one, but how are you missing more?
Well, and this is the thing, and this is something that, I learned by going on to a particular crime scene with the coroner, and it happened to have been a shooting. And it's same thing with them. I mean, they were there for hours. I mean, this coroner was there for hours and hours and hours, going through the scene, taking photos, checking the body, which did not happen in David's case. Coroner and the ME came in, they just said, okay, bag him up and leave. No, this coroner went through and really looked at everything and made everybody leave the scene until they were finished. But even after they finished, as we're driving back, we got there early in the morning. We didn't get back to the office until the sun was already down. So, I mean, when I say hours, they were there hours. Wow. And so they're, as we're driving back, they're like, oh shit. And I'm like, what? They're like, no, I'm sorry. It was when we were back at the office and they got the photos. Okay. They're looking through the photos because they got them developed right away. And they're like, oh shit. And I'm like, what? And they're like, look at this. I didn't see this entrance wound at the scene on the body, but yes, saw it in the photos. So I asked them, I'm like, well, is that common? And they're like, yeah, you can't always find all of the bullet fragments. You just can't. Sometimes you just have to wait. So the fact that the cleaning crew found that fragment, which turned out to be Ranya's the next day, that came when they were rolling up the rug and then it fell on the floor. To me, that makes perfect sense. I don't see anything weird or odd about that. It totally fits a crime scene like this. So I don't condemn them for missing that, because we don't know where, did it roll under the couch? It could have. We don't know. And even the cleaning crew doesn't know where on that rug that fragment was. They only know as they're rolling it up, it comes
That's true.
So it could have been anywhere. It could have easily rolled underneath the couch and they would not have found it.
Right.
So
that one can be explained away, but the one in the ceiling, and then also the one that was shot in the floor, I find suspect too. And I know a lot of people say, well, he was shooting at the dog. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't know that. Like, I mean, that's a good explanation for it, but you don't know that. Like, there's no way of knowing that he shot it at the dog. So to me, that's another thing that it's just another question or another.
Well, and not only that, David was an excellent shot.
Right.
I'm sure he was a marksman or whatever the highest level of. I mean, he went out shooting all the time. The guy knew how to handle a gun, and I think he would know how to shoot a dog.
Right.
But
and even if the dog ran away, like some people say, why would he just chase the dog down? And
Well,
finish the
and you
dog
don't
in
even
another
have to
room.
do that. You don't have to do that. When you have a moving target, you lead them. So as you're aiming and someone's running, and if they're, and you don't follow them, you lead. And as soon as
Right.
you see them heading, you're going to shoot where you think they're going to be. So by the time you shoot and it, boom, you get them. So that's what he would do. He wouldn't be shooting at a dog as it's running around the house. That makes no sense. That
Right.
is
Right.
none whatsoever. But
But
okay,
no,
so
yeah, so that was what got, that's the things that really got me. Well, there's a lot of other ones, but we'd be here and a lot of people already know, like know them. Like, I mean, it's, we're, like I said, you get tired of kind of rehashing it. Now, I can also see him maybe possibly doing this because, and I kind of changed my mind when I started reading the journal in a lot of ways. And because he does clearly state in the journal that he thought that he had PTSD, and that he was treating it like he, like, this is how I took the journal. I could be totally wrong. I always tell people that this is what I see, and it's not set in stone. Like, I mean, this is just what I think. And so for whatever it's worth, but to me, it doesn't, it's not out of the question that he could have had PTSD that was undiagnosed and that he was going through some stuff. I know you're shaking your head. I know this is what I know.
I
This
no
is
no
what
no.
I've
I
seen.
okay, but yes, you're right. You're right. This is your thoughts, and you have every right to feel them.
Right,
So go ahead.
right.
Yes.
And I'm totally open to being wrong. Trust me. I am open to this. And but I'm just saying I can see him, like, I'm more leaning toward that he didn't do this the more I look at it, to be honest. I really am. I'm trying to be in the middle, but I mean, I could see somebody like him, like, because they, like, he does, at least in the, from what I've read, and like when I read in the journals, and I think that's probably why he was playing around with marijuana a bit. I think that's why he was playing around with mushrooms a bit. I'm not saying he was doing mass amounts of them or anything, but I do think that he was treating something early. He thought he was treating something that he might have had, and the drinking, I don't put a lot of merit in. Like, it's not like I saw cases of beer all over the house, or
Yeah.
I think he was kind of like, yeah, I drink, I don't drink anymore, but I used to, and sometimes you drink. But that's the only thing that ever led me kind of to believe that he could have done it, because I mean, maybe he did. It's possible that he, like,
Well, and
the problem I have, let me just say,
okay.
the problem I have with the journal is you're looking at snapshots, and I write a journal too. And I mean, you're writing a section that is for that moment, and but it doesn't define your whole like day or anything like that. So I hope I'm wording this right.
No,
I
you
know,
are very well.
like, yeah, like one minute I can write in my journal, oh, I'm having a horrible time and my cat broke something, and that cat is annoying me, and I wish my cat would just leave me alone. It doesn't mean I don't want my cat or anything like that. 10 minutes later, I'm playing with my cat, we're having a great time. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, like, that's another thing that's making me always bounce back and forth. Yeah, he did say some harsh things about his daughter in the journal. You can read it. He did. It's just there. It's the facts. And I do honestly believe, and I know people can say I'm could be wrong, but I do think he was struggling with something, and that's up for speculation. It could have been, him being a father, him being trouble with his daughter, because you kind of read that he's kind of up and down in this journal with, like, having trouble with his daughter and adjusting to being a father. And I do think that remember he was in two, like, he was in a war. That's the way I look at it. So I mean, to think he has maybe PTSD that's undiagnosed is not a stretch for me. And then could he snap? It's possible, Catherine. It's possible.
Well, and I could see, I do see how you feel that way, and that's where your understanding lies. But I spent over 10 years working with military guys
Right.
alone in their hospitals and in their clinics, their little that they have on the post when they just need to have a checkup, but they don't need the hospital. They would go to the
Right.
clinic instead of the ER. I did this for 10 years. I've watched these soldiers. I've seen PTSD. And I mean, was David affected? It would be naive and I think almost criminal to say he was not affected by the war. That would
Right.
just be sheer stupidity. Yes, he was affected. However, he was not affected to the degree that is implied by so many. When reading the journal, and when he talks about that, especially the one section where you're talking about where he's like going, where he felt like he didn't say the words PTSD, but he was,
Right.
upset by what happened. He was referring to, and he states it as plain as day, about when he was lost. However, dad,
That's
who
true.
knows?
That really upset him. You're
That
right.
is what caused him, and the PTSD that, or whatever instance he was speaking about and speaking to then, was the fact that they were able to do that to him, and they could still do that to him to that day, because it's
Right.
the military, and once you're in, you're never really out. And so that is where his fear came in. It had nothing to do with having flashbacks, and never had anything to do with, violent tendencies. I mean, there's violent tendencies in so many of his people that were around him, but he never had a history of violent tendencies.
Right. And that's another thing that would make me flop too. Like that's what I'm
Mhm.
saying. Like I kind of, as I read the journal, I kept going back and forth. And like see, I don't, like, about stuff like that. I don't. I'm not a doctor. I've never been around. I know a couple of people that are in military, but they're currently active in the military. And I don't know anybody that has PTSD or they're suffering from it or anything. Like I've met a couple of people online, but I don't know them personally, so I don't know the signs in that. Are you like and I can ask you that, is it very like, is it common that people just with that PT just snap one day, or is there a lead up to it? Like there would be like, I have to believe there would be some signs of this before he just
Yeah, no.
snap.
And even in the psychology field, there's no snapped. It does not exist. That's some term that came along somewhere and people picked it up and ran with it. It does not happen.
Okay.
There is always going to be something that shows in behavior that leads up to it. And a lot of times with soldiers, what is referred to as PTSD today was back in the Vietnam era called shell shocked.
Shell shock.
And and trust me, when these guys start to have these flashbacks, they are violent and they are scary as hell. There was one time when I was living in Minneapolis, and the downstairs neighbor was a Vietnam vet, and he had lost both of his legs from the knees down. So he was in a wheelchair, and this guy had violent flashbacks. So even, and he was always getting drunk and always getting high, but you can't condemn him because of what he had to see and what he had to do. He mentally broke him as a human. So when you see true PTSD, and then you look at David, David did not have this PTSD. Was David affected? Absolutely, he was affected. Anybody would be. And that's not the question. But did he snap due to time in war? Oh, hell no. It just doesn't fit. But and then we also read in his journal where he talks about, he was frustrated with being a dad. And like you said, you would be an absolute liar if you read that journal and then tried to say he was this perfect father. He wasn't.
Right.
Sometimes he was a downright asshole. End of story. But being an asshole does not make you a killer. And so and as you're reading his journal, and again, we have to remember, he wrote this never knowing it would be public one day. These were his private thoughts, his private struggles with being a dad. And again, not uncommon with guys that I saw in the military. We would deal with soldiers that would have these same types of thoughts all the time. So it's not, and again, maybe it seems odd and abnormal to people who don't deal with guys that struggle with this, but you have to understand, these are soldiers that 9 times out of 10 marry because they're going to be sent off to war. Right. And that's it. They meet somebody and it's all fresh, it's all new. That's when everything is really at its peak and at its height. And then you leave, and then when you come back and there's a child, it messes with them.
That would be huge. That would be, and that was huge to David too, right? Like you can see that too.
It really was, because he wanted to spend time getting to know his wife, but he couldn't because he had to be a dad. And now people are judging him on that. Don't judge him unless you've been in his shoes. Don't judge him. And I really wish many people would not. And then as you're reading through the journal, and this is kind of what, leads me to realize how much he loved his daughter. Yes, he was angry and frustrated and resentful, or maybe resentful is not the right word, but wish he'd done things differently at the beginning. But then he reaches a point in his journal where he's like, he writes about a time when he got upset at something that she did. Nuts. There were nuts on a counter on the table.
Right.
And he was so angry at her. And then you're watching him read, as you're reading what he's writing, he's going through this whole post. And then at the end, he's like, what kind of dad am I to get upset over nuts on a table? Was it really worth it? Hurting her psyche for that moment in time, that brief moment in time, because she left nuts on the table and she was hungry. That is when you have someone who realizes and acknowledges, and it's like this light bulb goes off going, oh, holy crap, what did I just do to my kid? I can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
She's so much more valuable. And he says this, as a human, she's valuable. I should be encouraging her and loving her and uplifting her. But instead, I focused on that. Who am I to do that?
Right. And
So
that's what I was saying. These journals, you have to be careful because they're a moment in time. They're you can't judge it on that one. Like, yeah, like you were saying, they're like snapshots is the way I look at them. And that's the way I see my journal. It's a snapshot of that moment, what I was feeling or that day, but it's definitely not defining how I am every day. It's not
right.
defining. And I've said this in other interviews too, that I've done with other people on this case. The journal, yeah, he does say a lot of mean things, but I also see as the journal goes on that he's also be growing as a father. And
Yes.
I do see that. I see him coming to terms with being a father, and I see him embracing it, and I see him trying to do things different. What
Mhm.
I don't see in the journal, from what I've read, and I don't see a man going into madness or something like that. I don't. And that's another thing that makes me believe that he might not have done this, is that when you have the police department looking for a year to try to find any motive, and they looked, and believe me, if they could have found motive, they would have. If they could have
Yes.
tagged motive on this because it helps their story, they would have threw it at us. They would have said, "This is the motive. We got him."
Mhm.
And they found nothing in a year of digging. They went through everything of that man's life. You guarantee it. They went through everything of that man's life to try to find anything, and they can't. That I don't know. So you either
Yeah.
got to believe that there was no, he snapped out of the blue with no lead up, or he didn't do it. I mean, you can't have it every way.
Right.
So
And
that's why I'm always leaning that he didn't do it now.
right. And I want to go back to what you had just said about his journal, because, and so many people say he was spiraling down.
I don't see it.
That's not true. His journal shows him spiraling up. He
Right.
starts out really depressed and going, oh my gosh, why did I have a bratty kid? I'm not ready for this. I can't spend time with my wife. This kid is sucking our energy. And I'm sorry, as a new parent, I don't know. Most parents go through this at one point or another, and you would be lying if you said you didn't.
Right.
But toward the end, and then somewhere in the middle, where he one time Rania did something, or he got upset with her, and then he's writing this, and then he's like, wait a second, I just realized why I got upset at her. My dad did this. I am being my father right now. And again, something every parent, we all do it at one point or another. We're like going, oh my God, I just channeled my mother, right? Or my father. And this was his aha moment. And then he's like, I don't want to be that. So whatever experience he was remembering he went through with his dad, and I am not condemning his dad, because every parent makes mistakes, and every parent is a great parent at times, and every parent is a really horrible parent at times. So he must have thought of this moment in time where his dad was not being a good dad. And he then realized he was doing what his father did to him. And he says, I am not doing this. I can't do this to her. She deserves better. And then from that point forward, throughout the rest of the journal to the very, very end, at one of his very last entries, he's like, he did it. He's like, we connected. We're happy. She talks to me now.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a spiraling down.
And that's what I agree. That's what I saw when I was reading the journal too. I was expecting, for what I was hearing from other people, to see this big spiral, like, him having breakdowns and him like going, like, I guess it's what you think in your head of what a spiraling, like somebody going mad is. I guess you can probably blame Hollywood for that, like this image of somebody going crazy. But I don't see it in there, and I'm open to being wrong, but I don't read it in there. I see what you see. And to be honest, I see somebody that's adjusting to being a father and coming back. He just came back from a war. Let's not forget. Like, I mean, he was in a traumatic thing with the war. Then he got sent back, and then came home. He's got a daughter. Like, that's a lot for a young man to
Yep.
to place on his shoulders. Like, I mean, everybody would be struggling at times. And I've never said he was perfect. I've never heard
No,
you say
God,
he
no.
was perfect. And I've never heard anyone say he's a perfect person by any stretch. He
No.
was struggling with stuff.
Yeah, and and if I were to be honest, if I were to meet him in real life, I probably would not have liked him as a person. And because he's a very strong type A personality, I am a very strong type A personality, and those generally clash.
Oh, for
And
sure.
so, yeah, so I know with my personality, and I see who he is. I'm watching his interviews, I'm reading his journal, I'm watching what he's doing, and he's very driven and straight to the point and honest. I could see where we would be like button heads left and right. But that would not mean that he wouldn't be a good person. It just means our personalities would not match. So, people who go around going, oh, yeah, you're just doing that because you're just, no, that's not it at all. I'm trying to look at this from a realistic point of view, from an unbiased point of view, because if I wouldn't like him as a person and I'm still defending him, for me, that kind of tells me something about what I'm seeing in the case. And yeah, is there anything else other than
That's
where he talks about where you
no,
see he could have done it?
no, that's about, yeah, that's about it. Like I really am trying to stay in it's hard to stay in the middle because eventually you die.
You
Eventually
have
the
to be.
evidence is dragging you to, and I kept going over and over the evidence. And I'm like, I'm missing something. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's maybe because he's an American soldier or something. And I don't know. Maybe something makes me want to think that, he couldn't do it. And I don't want that to cloud it. That's another thing. Like, I'm like, I have to look at it in the middle, and that's what I'm doing. But
You can't. You're going to have to make up your mind.
yeah, like you can only look at so much evidence before it just, and it's, like I was saying in another interview, it's either horrible police work at best or it's a cover up at the worst, because there's so much they didn't do. They didn't test any, like, certain things, and they didn't explain things, like that big blood stain on the lazy boy chair. Why was that? That is huge to me. Why would you not test that? Why would you not test the
Yeah,
dog feces?
exactly. They had that big spot on the
Yes,
footrest on the chair, but yet there's no blood on the rug underneath it.
right.
Explain that to me, please.
The blood on the magazine, that
Mhm.
I and then when I started talking, the more, that's why I kept leaning more and out of that he didn't do it, is because as I talked to the vet, and then I talked to my friend who's a gunsmith, and he's telling me that what this ammunition can do,
Oh yeah.
and stuff like that. And even my friend, I was just telling him about the case, and he's like, that sounds really weird to me that he thinks there should be blood everywhere. That's
Oh,
what
there
he's
should
saying, like
be.
the
There should be.
walls, the ceiling.
Mhm.
And he said, if you have that many gunshots in somebody's head with hollow point bullets, the whole room's going to be covered. The walls, the ceiling.
There are four head wounds
Right.
that they logged. There's a fifth bullet with Camel's blood on. So Camille has three with her, but they do log two wounds to her head, one
Yep.
to Rania, one to four. So we have four head wounds. Where's the blood? And where's the brain matter? It's not to be found. And again, I shoot hollow points, but only at the range. I don't go around shooting people.
Right.
I don't, but I mean, at the range, I shoot hollow points.
Right.
So at targets, I see what those suckers can do, how they expand, what happens when they hit something hard. And I'm sorry, but the skull is hard. So
Yep.
when it hits, it's going to mushroom, then go through, bounce around, collect a lot of stuff, and then exit. So it's going to make obviously a bigger wound. But when you're looking at how he's laying, where it exits the left parietal. So it exits up here, and that section of his head is facing the window, and the bullet entrance is this way up in the ceiling. So we have exit here, and it's up here, and there's nothing on that. There's no blood on that bullet at all, and they state no blood. I know there's someone out there that keeps trying to say that there's blood on that. No, the BCA reports clearly state blood was not found, was not indicated. And so they took a swab and then found DNA at that point.
Right.
DNA is not just blood. It can be from many, many sources. But so to have me, it is absolutely physically impossible. It defies all laws of physics to have it enter wherever it entered. We don't know where the entrance was, but exit here, turn around, go back up this way, and then not contain any tissue whatsoever, no blood whatsoever. It's absolutely, so to me, so they don't have the bullet that killed him, and it wasn't in the dog feces. So
Right.
where is it?
You think they would even test the dog? I don't understand why they didn't test the dog feces, even just to argue with like anyone that
Mhm.
said, well, the dog couldn't have ate all of that. They can say, we tested it. There's bone fragments in
Right.
it. That ends that argument. Done.
Right.
It's put away.
Now
Why
they can never do that. They
they
never
can never
collected.
do that.
Mhm.
Right. And that was really what started me leaning a lot to the fact that I don't think he did it, because when I talked to my friend and he was actually showing me the bullets. Like I never seen a bullet like that before. I'm not like I have a 22. I don't have anything
Oh, you
bigger
have
than
little
that.
tiny.
22. They're little. Anybody that knows that's listening that or watching that knows a 22. They're little teeny
Yes, very
bullets. And then
tiny.
he handed me that one for that was used in this case, and I was like, oh my god, that's scary to me. And
Yeah,
that
and it
and
was a full metal jacket, so it's a full metal jacket
yep,
hollow point, so it's a good solid bullet. That sucker
yep,
would have made a mess. And
yep,
not to be rude, and I'm not trying to be crass, but it's honest. It would have made a mess.
yeah, and that's what my friend said. He said the same thing. And like I said earlier, that's what he jumped to right away was there must have been blood all over the ceiling, right? And I was like, no, there was none. And he's like, that stopped him right there. He's like, that doesn't make sense. He's like,
Mhm.
there, like he goes, and then he was showing me videos on YouTube. This is where that we got. I think I sent you the video, but he was sending me videos of what these bullets do when you shoot them in a ballistic gel and when you shoot them into all these different things. He's like, and that's what he was so hard on making that point to me. He's like, you have to see what these bullets can do. And if there was that many that went through that, like that many bullets went through somebody's head, it would be everywhere. And
Mhm.
then I went and looked at crime scene photos. I want to see what gunshot photos like from old crime scenes
Mhm.
would look like. And there's a lot of blood when from one shot
Yep.
from somebody that's shot in the head. I remember seeing one photo, and the whole wall behind the guy was covered, like
And
painted.
it depends on what they're using. Like a shotgun
Right.
obviously leave more than a
Oh,
handgun,
for sure. Right.
but still, like you said, every photo you see, there's brain matter and there's
Yes.
blood and there's usually chunks of little pieces of skull
Yep.
everywhere.
Yep.
And there's none of that in this scene.
Right. And I know they're gonna say, well, the dog ate it. I mean, but and I know they always blame Paleo. I mean, the dog does everything, but
Poor dog.
I know, but I mean, then we get to the selective, okay, but he didn't lick over here, he ate this, and that doesn't explain the walls or the ceiling. I mean, I'll
And
give it
it,
to him on the floor,
yeah,
but
okay, let's say that the dog decided to pick and choose and decide to lick in areas, and for some reason the Mino Black doesn't pick up on any of this.
yep,
Impossible, but let's just say for the sake
we'll
of
go with
argument,
it.
this is how it goes. But yet, if it's exiting the left side, there should be spatter all over that window or that curtain. Well, the window was open, so
Mhm.
it should be all over that window, because he was only a couple of feet away from it, 3 feet
Right,
maybe. There's nothing.
right.
That
And the
window
dog,
is
yeah,
clean,
no
and the
blood
dog
there,
could
none on
reach there.
can't reach it. That's what yeah. So I mean, I'll follow. A lot of it, I'll go with you on it.
Uh,
But then there's some that you just can't explain. And the other thing that's always really bothered me in that crime scene, and I've said it before, is the knife. Why was that knife even there?
Yep.
And a lot of people they kind of don't talk about it. I'm like, why was there an open knife there? Why is it even there? If this was what people say, and he went and this was a murder suicide,
He would not
why?
have touched that knife.
Yeah, why the knife? It doesn't mean, and to me,
Yeah.
these are things that
And
make
that
they don't
again, yes, that again screams staging, because it was open, it was blade open, blade up, blade pointing down,
right.
and by his leg. And it has all three of their DNA on it. And then the skull piece we see on the floor, and I will keep talking about this, that skull piece, you see straight lines on that
Mhm.
skin. The dog cannot rip a straight line.
Right,
Does not happen. Human
right,
cannot rip a straight line. Does not happen. So who
right.
took off David's skull?
Yep. And why is the knife even there? That's what
Yes.
I've said that so many times. I'm like, explain why the knife was even there
Yeah.
if it was a murder suicide. And to me, and no matter who did it, I always say it was definitely staged. I mean,
Yeah. Nobody brings a knife to a gunfight. How
right,
stupid is that?
right. Especially if it's a murder suicide. It's like,
Yeah.
why? I just want to know why the knife is there. And I don't buy that the bullet in the floor was him shooting at the dog. I won't buy it. I don't buy it. It's possible. I wasn't there, but I don't see it.
No. But again,
And that
these guys are taught to lead their target.
right.
And you're not going to just shoot randomly at a dog, and only once. I'll shoot randomly. Oops, I missed him. Okay, I'll let it go.
Right.
Nope. You will lead that shoot where you know they're going to be coming, and when by the time you shoot, they then basically run into that projectile and then you get them. So yeah.
That's where that's why I'm leaning more and more always, and I've said that to you before, I'm leaning more and more over to, I don't think he did it. And how did I get to this, right or wrong? I wasn't there. I don't know, but I'm going by what I'm reading and what I'm seeing. And it just doesn't add up. And there's a lot of things that aren't explained. And
Yeah. And I
they
agree
make,
with you, because when I first came across this case, I, said it a million times, I honestly came in believing he was guilty. I had no
right. I've heard
reason
you
to
say,
believe he wasn't guilty. And
right, I
then
heard
as
you
soon
say
as,
that.
yeah, and as soon as I start reading those autopsy reports, I'm like, oh, things aren't adding up here. This guy
Right.
didn't do it.
Right. And that's how I was. I was like, and that's what everybody kept telling me. You have to read the reports yourself. I'm like, I will do that. I'll take that challenge. I'm going to read everything I can. And like I said at the beginning, that's a lot. It's a lot. I didn't realize how much there was to read. And then all the photos and then the scripts and everything. And I can only go by what I'm reading and seeing. And I don't see how he did it. I just don't.
Yeah,
I don't. I'm sorry.
I agree with you 100%. But okay, so we've actually been on here like an hour and a half.
We're rocking.
We are, but so we should probably cut this before they decide to cut it for me. So
Okay.
before we go, let everybody know your channel, because I will put a link down below in the description box. But
Perfect. Yeah,
let
you
us
can
know.
find me right here on YouTube at Crypt Rick's I've Been Thinking. And we do lots of cool interviews. I interview about not just the Crowley case. I cover cryptocurrency. I've interviewed people about flat Earth. Which so have you, Catherine. Great interviews, by the way. Amazing. I love talking to him. David is amazing.
Oh, he is.
And I cover, like I said, cryptocurrency, flat Earth,
Bigfoot. Hey, you have to
Bigfoot.
do more on the Bigfoot. Seriously.
I do. I do. I actually do. I have a couple more interviews lined up for people that even live in my area. So I got more Bigfoot coming. And then I just started my own radio show, which will be on every Monday night. You have to go to, I have to get this right because I always
Send
want
me
to
the
say
link and I'll put that in the description box.
I will. I definitely will. So Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And you go there and I'm on every Monday night, 6 p.m. Studio A. And definitely check me out there. And I have a bunch of guests that I've already done 2 shows and I got more guests lined up. So it'll be great to see you there.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Rick, for coming on. And we will revisit this, especially after you meet up with the vet again and get more of our questions answered. The poor guy.
Will.
It's like we'll just inundate him.
I know. Like I'm going to be putting photos at him now and everything. Yeah. So no, I will though. I'm going to write down the questions that we went through because I'm as curious as you are. So I'm going to bring him some of the crime scene photos and that and kind of see what he thinks. I think it's a great way I think it's a good thing to do and I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. So perfect. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
You too. Take care, Catherine.
Okay. Bye, Rick.
Bye.